of Ryerson's Social Justice Week. This is our 10th anniversary, and we're grateful that you've joined us today. As people find us in cyberspace and settle in, you can take a look at our slide here and see all of our information about all of the various ways you can get in touch with us by email, our website with our full program, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We really want to hear from you. Your feedback is important to us, so tweet using the hashtag Social Justice Week 2020 and let us know what you're thinking about. So today, we go beyond borders again to bring you Care for Those Who Care for You, United for Domestic Workers' Rights. My name is Kike Roach, and I'm the Unifor Chair in Social Justice and Democracy here at Ryerson. To bring you this event this morning takes the work of many people. So I want to say a big thanks, first of all, to the amazing Dr. Winnie Ng, who had the brilliant idea 10 years ago to found Social Justice Week and bring us all together. I want to say thanks to the Faculty of Arts, Dean Pamela Sugerman, to the Faculty of Community Services, Dean Lisa Barnoff. We want to thank our sponsors, International Federation of Domestic Workers, and all of our other sponsors for Social Justice Week. We want to say a particular thank you to the Canadian Labour Congress, who has generously helped us with some of our costs. And we also want to thank our language interpreters, Esperanza, Bettina, and Silvina, who are joining us, as well as our ASL team from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service. Right now you see Marcia and also Christopher will join us. From our captioning team, Lori is helping us out, and we also are grateful for Luke from the Media Services team, who's helping us. Also want to say thanks to our communications team, Julia, Noshin, and today Daphne. And a very, very special thank you to Salman Khan, whose excellent work as assistant to the Unifor Chair we've relied on for many years. He's been with us since the inception of Social Justice Week, and he's a great person to work with. So this morning, we're really delighted that Jenny An is here to moderate this session. Jenny An has a long history of working in the Canadian and international labor movements, as well as working with civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations. After having spent about 2 decades in senior leadership roles with Unifor, which has endowed this chair, and its predecessor, the Canadian Auto Workers Union, she is now the executive director of OCUFA, which is the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations. Over the course of her career, Jenny has built a reputation for creativity, for integrity, and vision. And she has a long-standing commitment to issues of social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that her passion for this is really evident with her work with the International Domestic Workers Federation, among other organizations. So thank you so much. And Jenny An, please take it from here.
Thank you, Kike, and thank you to all the participants who are joining us through this virtual new world of ours. And of course, thank you to Ryerson for bringing us together for this incredible week of social justice sharing and learning. And although we come together today on this panel from around the globe, we are also here, of course, because of Kike Roach, her leadership, and Ryerson University, who has brought us together. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land that where Ryerson is situated. So despite that we are virtual and not having an in-person event, of course, because we are here today through the leadership of Kike Roach and Ryerson, we want to acknowledge the land. So we are all treaty people, and we want to honor the Indigenous people and the land that we would be situated at Ryerson. Ryerson is located in Toronto, and Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, the Haudenosaunee, that bound them together to share the territory and protect the land. And subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So it is in this spirit we bring you a stellar panel under this year's Social Justice Week theme of Beyond Walls, Beyond Borders. And it is fitting that we have these speakers that go beyond the walls and the borders, from South Africa to Hong Kong, and of course, leadership here in Canada to show you what is happening with those who care for our loved ones. We're really excited to have this panel today of strong leaders who happen to be all women. And they are going to talk to us about how they're breaking down the walls of inequality, racism, sexism, and worker exploitation. But before we begin, just need to go through a couple more logistics with you. So if you would like to have Portuguese to English interpretation, please click below where you have a button titled Interpretation and click the language of your preference. And even if you just need the English, please click the interpretation button at this time, the English preference. And as mentioned, this webinar is recorded, so hopefully everybody will be okay with this, that our speakers are joining us live on the screens. I also want to acknowledge the vast number of people who are making today's event possible. Of course, our Portuguese English translators, Silvina, Bettina, Esperanza, the ASL interpreters, Marcia and Christopher, the captioning person, Lori, and of course, all the people at Ryerson, not just Kike Rocha, she's mentioned, but Salman and Luke as well, who have made this possible and who are going to make us look fantastic because we have their support. We were supposed to have an additional panel speaker, as it was advertised, Caruza Maria Oliveira from Brazil. And unfortunately, in these virtual times, she was not able to join us today due to internet issues in Brazil, but we do want to send her regrets as she wishes that she could have joined us today. But nevertheless, we have 4 great speakers, both, as I mentioned, within Canada and the international labor movement, which I will introduce shortly. So just so our participants know, once we hear from the speakers, we do have some time for questions and answers. So if you would like, please click to the bottom of the screen on your Zoom screen where there's a Q&A button, and please type in your questions and we will try to get to as many, if not all, the questions at the end of the speakers. We will, however, try to consolidate some of those questions in the interest of time to try to respond to everyone. So after all of this, let's just get right into our stellar panel today. And we know that with COVID-19, this pandemic has laid bare the devastating effects for decades of the underinvestment in public health and our care systems and the harmful politics of austerity. So many countries were ill-prepared to deal with the scale and the rapidly evolving nature of this pandemic. Millions of care and health workers, overwhelmingly represented by women, were left without access to essential personal protective equipment, PPE, and other health and safety measures. Pre-existing national and global structural inequalities across gender, class, and racialized lines have been exposed and exasperated. We know that this pandemic has underlined the centrality of health and care to our well-being and existence. The need for adequate investment in equitable, quality public health and care systems is more apparent and urgent than ever. And we have seen this here in Canada and, of course, globally around the world. Workers across the health care and education sectors, whether working in hospitals, hospices, schools, care homes, private homes, as domestic workers, whether it's in the public or private sector, deserve working conditions, decent working conditions, and fair pay that reflect their enormous contributions to our societies. So it's fitting today as we prepare for tomorrow, which is October 29th, the International Trade Union Confederation's Global Day of Action for Care, where workers around the world will take action for a caring economy. And what they're asking the world to take notice of and take action tomorrow is to have investment in public healthcare and care, including, of course, mental health, childcare, early childhood education, elderly care, and other social care services that include, of course, domestic workers that serve all of our communities. So you'll see the different points here without reading through it all, but we want to have the creations of millions of decent, good jobs in this sector for decent pay and working conditions, including equal pay for equal work of equal value, for equity and non-discrimination in recruitment, retention, training, and promotion opportunities, and of course, for universal, gender-responsive social protection that's available to all workers, regardless of their employment status, their migrant status, race, disability, gender identity, or social in orientation. And of course, that is inclusive of all workers in the informal economy. And last but not least, but we want to ensure that there's availability and accessibility to all for public health, to care and education services. So let's take this moment and prepare for our action that will take place around the world tomorrow on October the 29th. So I'm going to introduce to you our first speaker, who is from the International Domestic Workers Federation, a global federation that is led by women that are supporting and representing women care workers around the world. So Myrtle Witbooi is the president of the International Domestic Workers Federation and the general secretary of the South African Domestic Service and Alliance Workers Union. Born just outside of Cape Town in South Africa, she became a domestic worker in 1962 due to the lack of opportunities and apartheid laws that prevented her from pursuing a medical career. She has worked to improve the lives of domestic workers since 1971. So please welcome Myrtle.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. It is my honor to be present here today. I think if we really need to speak about the IDWF, we need to see who are we and why are we only women. In the year 2006, domestic workers come together in Amsterdam. At that meeting, we start to talk about ourselves. We start to talk about how sorry we are for ourselves. We start to talk about how we're suffering. But like all conferences in 2006, after the conference, everything went quiet. In the year 2008, the IOF called us together in Geneva. And there we really start to talk and catch up on what happened in the year 2006. And we decide, what can we do to better our own lives? What can we do to empower domestic worker women to speak up for themselves? And as the years go on, we start talking. 2009, we exposed for the first time to the International Labour Organization. Of course, some of us did not even know what is the International Labour Organization. I remember in South Africa, when the COSATU Federation used to come back and say, the ILO said this. I would ask, who is the ILO? What is it all about? Not realizing that they were talking about us. 2010, we went for the first time. The second time, 29, we went to practice to see who are we going to face, who will be important. And in 2010, we had our first experience at the ILO. It was amazing. It was such an experience. Here am I, a domestic worker from the year 1963, sitting in the ILO, facing governments, facing people, and having to speak up for domestic workers. I was so nervous. I did not know what was happening. But when I look behind me and I see the powerful delegation of domestic workers and that we are there and that we are there in spirit, I realize we've got a big task ahead of us. We start campaigning, we start talking. The year 16th of June 2011, after many tears, after many insults, after many things, we got Convention 189. Convention 189 belongs to us. It is ours. It is our weapon to fight for ourselves. Now we've got Convention 189. We've got beautiful clauses. We've got everything that say protect domestic workers. But what are we going to do with this Convention 189? How are we going to make it a reality for domestic workers? Immediately we start talking about powerful domestic workers and ourselves. What is our next step? Slowly but surely, somebody come up, many veterans and people start saying, what about a domestic workers federation? Wow, we just look at people, we say, what? A domestic workers federation by women? Yes, it is not impossible. We start getting very excited. 2013 in Uruguay, where the best president in the world was, we launched the International Domestic Workers Federation. Prior to that, we were just a network. Now we are a federation. What happened at that launch? I am sure it caught me unaware, Elizabeth. All of a sudden, I believe I'm now a president of a federation in the world of women, mostly women. One of the male comrades at that say, oh, well, those won't work because it's just women. I said, watch us, watch us. And as the years go up, at that day when we launched, we had 48 affiliates and we were present in 48 affiliates and we had 230,000 members involved in the IDWF. Just to go to the front, today, we are so powerful. We've got 59 affiliates and we moved to nearly 500,000 members. But what is the role really of the IDWF? What is our role? What do we have to do? We have to make sure that firstly, Convention 189 is understood by workers. Secondly, that our voices is going to reach all those countries, migrant, urban, rural, Arab countries, Azanian, everywhere in the world. We need to ensure that Convention 189, that what we want, the freedom that we want, because that day at the ILO, they gave us back our respect, our dignity. They gave us a weapon. They gave us our own tool. But a tool needs to work. And we decide to mobilize. We decide to speak to other workers. We decide to move out. We decide to fight gender-based violence. We decide to fight low wages. We decide to fight long hours. We decide really, we need to make an impact. If we look today, we find ourselves making an impact in Arab countries. We find ourselves in Qatar. We find ourselves in Lebanon. Unfortunately, there's also sad stories behind our success. In Lebanon, we find after we form a federation, organization there, we found that we had to close down because they are not allowed. We found that the workers that was the leaders was actually moved out of the country. And there we said, today we are still struggling in Lebanon, but we have reached out. We find that our General Secretary moved on to Qatar. Today we find that they say the Cavallo system should stop. But of course we know everything that they put on paper and say it must stop takes years before it really takes. So what is the role really of this IDWF? The role is to make sure that this unjust system that's existing in the world, the system of not knowing who I am when I enter into a country, the system of being abused and exposed by agencies, the system of losing my passport, the system of losing my identity. We have got a big task in the IDWF. The IDWF today has got a strong woman-based executive from the different countries. It is all women, and we've got one strong male comrade from America. So we are a strong, executive. And all of us know where we come from. All of us know the struggle of the domestic workers. We have so many abuse cases today. Many of our offices has got workers that has been abused, workers that has been exploited. In South Africa, one of my biggest organizers, she has been exploited. She's been abused by her employer where she worked. We won a big court case for her. Today, she is one of my strongest organizers, and she's able to go out and tell other workers, you have to organize yourself. You have to use your own voice. So this is our role. Our role is also to make sure that many migrant workers is going to come into the IDWF. Our role is going to be sure that now that we're also entering, of course, Elizabeth is going to talk much more about COVID-19, but we're entering a new world of technology. We're entering a new modern world where domestic workers must not be left behind. Domestic workers need to understand their phone. Domestic workers need to understand the computer. They need to understand that technology is taking over this world. So we see ourselves as the spokesperson for domestic workers, but we also see ourselves, and our biggest role is to empower domestic workers to challenge their own governments within their own country. If we in South Africa could challenge our government, if we could even take our Minister of Labour to court, and that is all because we belong to the IDWF. It's all because we know that day when we went to court, when we were fighting for the COIDA, the compensation bill in South Africa, we know that we had the IDWF behind us. We know we had all this powerful women behind us, and we know if something would have happened that day to us in that court last year, we know that we would have had the support of the IDWF. So the IDWF is really showing its power by saying, stop, we had enough. Stop the abuse of domestic workers. Stop the long hours. Stop the little wages. We are now going to take control of our own life. And really, 2020 has really shown us that domestic workers need to stand up. Domestic workers need to empower themselves. Domestic workers need to say, we are part of this economy. We are part of this technology. Don't tell us anymore we don't know. We want to know. I also want to walk in my hand with a smartphone. And I also want to say, I know what I want. And this is what I want. I want to be free. I want to be able to enjoy my life. I want to be able to open my hand and say, pay me. I have done a good job. I want to be able to say, while I care for you, I need somebody to care for my family because they also need care. I want to say to you, while you say education for your children, I want to be able to educate my own children also. I want to be able to say, I want to have social security for my family. I want to have social security for all. And this is the powerful message I want to leave to you behind. I want to say to you, yes, there's many sad stories today. There's many sad stories about COVID-19. There's very sad stories, and Elizabeth will touch on that. But I want to say to you, walk with us, support our campaigns, help us to show the world that in another few years, like one of our organizers has said, the one that becomes so powerful, we need 1 million workers to be organized in South Africa. Our challenge is each one, teach one, and each one free one. I thank you all.
Thank you, Myrtle. That was so inspiring. I love your comment to tell our participants here to work with us, to walk with us. You've shown us as a leadership person, your example of how we empower women, but more specifically, domestic workers. And this is what today's panel is all about, to understand how we can care for those who care for us, because domestic workers also deserve to be free, to be paid well for their hard work, and to support their families. So thank you very much, Myrtle. Joining us today now is Marie Clark Walker. Here in Canada, she is the Secretary Treasurer of the Canadian Labour Congress. She is the first racialized woman to hold this position as Secretary Treasurer of the Canadian Labour Congress. She's also the first racialized woman to be elected as the Executive Vice President and the youngest officer in the CLC history. Marie served as the Executive Vice President for 5 terms before being elected as the Secretary Treasurer in 2017. But in addition to this important role, she also is the chairperson for the Women's Committee of the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, that we just spoke about in terms of the Global Day of Action for Care. So please welcome Marie Clark Walker.
Thank you, Jenny. And wow, Myrtle, that was amazing. Absolutely amazing. I want to thank the organizers and all the other speakers, Kike and all of those who have been responsible for Social Justice Week over the last 10 years. I thank you all. This is an amazing week every single year, but we're really pleased to celebrate the 10th anniversary. I also want to say that I am coming to you from the unceded territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I also want to pay tribute to those who came here involuntarily, particularly the ancestors of African origin and descent, whose shoulders I stand on every single day, and they give me the strength to do the work that I do. So the International Domestic Workers Federation plays such an important role as a global union and a voice for domestic workers globally. They've done so much over the years to bring domestic workers' stories to decision makers and to global discussions about labor rights and gender equality. Hearing the stories of domestic workers has been integral in the process of winning strong, inclusive language in ILO conventions, in collective agreements, etc. And that's why the Canadian Labour Congress helped make sure that domestic workers were present during the negotiations for the ILO Convention 189, and why we continue to maintain strong links with the Federation. The perspective I'd like to bring to today's conversation is in my role as a member of the governing body of the International Labour Organization and as the worker spokesperson for the standard setting discussion on the new Convention 190 and Recommendation 206 on violence and harassment in the world of work. The ILO is the only tripartite organization in the UN system, and for over 100 years, governments, workers, and employers have worked together to establish international labor standards, develop policies, and devise programs to promote decent work for all. ILO conventions put in place the basic principles that should be reflected in every country's labor employment legislation: our rights to work and our rights at work. Some of these rights are considered fundamental, and they apply to all member states, regardless of whether or not a particular country has ratified a convention. These are freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, the elimination of forced or compulsory labor, the abolition of child labor, and the elimination of discrimination in respect of employment and occupation. When a member state ratifies an ILO convention, that convention is binding. They're also obliged to ensure that their legislation complies with the convention's provisions. Conventions are determined and agreed to through a very lengthy process, requiring agreement from all 3 parties of the ILO: governments, employers, and workers. At each stage, including the decision of whether or not to even hold a standard setting discussion, there is tripartite discussion. I'm telling you all of this, as Myrtle has already indicated, most don't know. And also so that you can appreciate how monumental the victories were when we successfully negotiated both ILO Convention 189 on domestic workers and ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. Convention 190 was negotiated over a 2-year period, and Recommendation 206 as well, which is the guidance document, was also negotiated at the same time. So that was also groundbreaking. Each document reflects years of relentless advocacy and campaigning, not just at the ILO, but in every single country. And it was union women, including domestic workers, who led the charge to see all of these instruments to successful conclusion. And union women, including domestic workers, who are now pushing hard to see these conventions ratified and implemented. I had the privilege, and it definitely was a privilege, of serving as the worker spokesperson for the 2 years of the standard setting discussions that led to the adoption of Convention 190 and Recommendation 206. I'm so proud to have been part of this negotiating. It was a it is a groundbreaking instrument, and I was very proud of the work that we all did together, because it wasn't just one person pushing, it was the entire room that was pushing to get this done. The development and adoption of Convention 190 and Recommendation 206 was a pivotal moment and a great demonstration of how the ILO is supposed to work. The new instruments are groundbreaking and visionary, but also practical and actionable. Make no mistake, we have this convention because of years of hard work and advocacy of the global labor movement, and especially women in unions. This includes the IDWF and domestic workers around the world. So many workers step forward to tell their stories, to pressure governments, to support the discussions, and to push for an inclusive, comprehensive instrument. Our discussions in committee gave voice to many of these stories, clearly demonstrating how pervasive violence and harassment are in the world of work. The hope and sense of possibility that this convention and recommendation will bring is what's going to drive change forward as we move from negotiation and adoption to ratification and implementation. The convention makes it very clear that everyone has the right to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. And our goal from the very outset was to craft a convention and recommendation that would leave no one behind. We made sure that the convention covered all workers in all sectors, including the informal sector, regardless of their nature of their contract, their migrant status, or any other ground of discrimination. We made sure the language covered all situations in the world of work, not just the physical workplace. So it covers where workers sleep, when the accommodation is provided by the employers. Many domestic workers find themselves living in other people's homes. It covers where they eat, where they rest, where they use sanitary facilities. It covers social events, work-related travel, and even the commute to and from work. We were very clear. People whose experience of violence and harassment is exacerbated by discrimination and inequality must have the strongest and most robust protection. The process of reaching an agreement on how best to protect people with multiple and intersecting identities was extremely difficult for everyone on the workers' bench. There was a lot of homophobia prior to and following the discussion, as well as during the discussion. So whether it was age, disability, race, ethnicity, indigenous status, migrant status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or any other grounds, every person in the world of work should feel that this convention and recommendation covers them. And that was our priority. We were able to come to an agreement on language that would not only address the grounds of discrimination mentioned in our initial list, which was lengthy, but it would go further. Language to accommodate evolving international discussions about discrimination and human rights by referring to existing international labor standards and human rights instruments. And I must say, after the adoption, the celebration from the back of the room just infected the entire room. Informal workers led by the domestic workers just brought the entire room together. And that celebration, and I believe there's video of that celebration floating around on the internet somewhere. So now that we have the convention, what's next? The International Labor Conference adopted the instruments, and it sent an unequivocal message that violence and harassment in the world of work are unacceptable and incompatible with decent work. The convention and recommendations set out a clear framework for action, grounded in social dialogue and requiring an integrated, gender-responsive approach to prevention and elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. So now it's up to governments to ratify this new convention. And a few governments have already done so. They've stepped up. Uruguay and Fiji were the first ones to ratify. And that means that the convention then comes into force on June 25th, 2021. There are a number of other countries that are pushing to make sure that this gets done. Argentina and Italy, they're also in the process of moving it through their government systems, as well as Namibia has signaled its intention to ratify. Although Canada has also signaled its intention to ratify, it hasn't done so yet. Our federal structure is complex, and each of our provinces and territories needs to agree before the Canadian government can make a commitment at the ILO. Discussions are underway, and although the convention has the support of the federal government, the labor movement, and even employers, we don't yet have unanimity among the provinces and territories. The Canadian Labour Congress has been campaigning for this at the federal level, and it was one of our 4 priorities at our last lobby day last year. And we are pushing ratification through our Done Waiting campaign, and we're also working with our provincial and territorial federations of labor to step up the pressure in the jurisdiction that is dragging its feet, Alberta. In our view, much of Canada's legislation is already compliant with much of the provisions of the new convention. It should be just a matter of course, but we have to make a case to decision makers. And why is ratification so important? Well, ratification is what makes the convention enforceable. It's what allows workers to hold governments and employers to account for their commitment. And it's how we translate principles and ideas into meaningful change. Following ratification, governments should address any gaps in legislation and regulation and work together with employers and workers to create the safe, respectful working environment needed to realize the right to a world of work free from violence and harassment. So it's up to us, up to unions and worker organizations to create the conditions to make ratification an imperative for governments and to ensure the convention is fully implemented. I truly believe it was the voice and the stories of workers themselves that won the day in Geneva and can help build an effective and successful campaign to ratify. I know this was the case for Convention 189 as well. Storytelling can be powerful. It is a powerful form of advocacy and can also help members feel like they're part of the change that's happening at the time. And in fact, they are. The pandemic has shown us just how important it is that we keep the momentum up to ratify and implement both of these conventions. It has shown us the importance of care. We need to make sure that as we celebrate International Day for Care or International Day for Decent Work and look at care workers, that we celebrate our care workers, not just on that day, but every single day. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marie. Your work, both here in Canada and internationally, is inspiring. You're making a difference. We need those strong voices, such as yours and so many others, and your work with Convention 190, Recommendation 206, and of course, with 189 is so important. And perhaps later on, once we hear from everyone, you can also share with us how we can put more pressure on our federal government and the provinces and territories, because it is shameful that we do not have Canada ratifying 189 as of yet. But before we get into our action and things we can do, I want to introduce our next speaker, another fantastic, strong woman leader who's the president of Sciu, Service Employees International Union, Charlene Stewart. She is the president of Sciu. She's also the Service Employees International Union International Vice President, and she is the first Canadian woman to sit on the Sciu International Executive Board. She's also the first woman to sit on the Canadian Labour Congress's Executive Committee. Charlene is a proud Métis. She is humbled and honored to represent her Sciu healthcare workers, which is 57,000 members. And she believes being a leader in the labor movement was what she was born to do. So let's give a warm welcome for Charlene Stewart.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Jenny. And excuse me, I want to first thank all of the organizers and the leaders and Ryerson for putting on this event today. It's fantastic, and I feel really privileged and honored to be part of a panel of such distinguished women, as you said. So it's a dynamic morning already. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you on our Zoom today. I'm going to start off going back a bit. Back to May 14th, 2020, where here in Toronto, the Canadian Armed Forces issued a report that landed like a virtual bomb in the press and the public. The brave women and men in uniform documented the conditions they witnessed in many of Ontario's nursing homes when they were asked to come in and manage the care inside those nursing homes when deaths were escalating and the pandemic was spreading. There wasn't a single media outlet that didn't cover what those soldiers saw, what they smelled, and what they heard. Conditions of overcrowding and dangerously low staffing levels, the scent of urine and open wounds, the cries for help and human affection. Because this panel is in part a discussion of how the pandemic exposed the conditions of care for workers, I wanted to highlight that event and the media stories that resulted for a reason. It took the voice of the Canadian Armed Forces for the media to hear and listen to what workers have been describing literally for decades. So think about that. Women working in the care sector, literally ignored for decades. Then boom, one report from the authorities and everyone hears them. How crushing it must be to be a nurse, a personal support worker, or an environmental service worker, to see and feel what it's like when people with authority speak, when for years those care workers were ignored. That is sexism, that is racism, and that is classism. The pandemic exposed a failed system built on silencing the cries of mostly elderly women in care and silencing the economic pains of mostly women of color who deliver their care. I wanted to use the story of the Armed Forces report as an example of how badly our systems of institutional care have been able to exploit both residents and workers. But as we all know, when you're alone, seemingly working in the shadows and working without a network of support, the exploitation and suffering can be that much darker. We see these same stories in home care and in domestic care. Predominantly women workers, marginalized workers, and many times immigrants. Sciu Healthcare is the largest union in the home care sector, a sector of care I'd like to focus on because of the similarities to domestic workers. So let's look at the work. As Myrtle said, low wages, precarious employment, a lot of under the table work, isolated from public view. And then let's look at the workers. They are the working poor, predominantly women, large immigrant population, and racialized. If there was a Venn diagram between the profiles of home care workers and domestic workers, they might make a perfect circle. I know this group today is familiar with care in the care sector and the work, but I wanted to take a moment to read for you, as you said, Marie, stories from the front line, 2 excerpts from home care workers who testified at a provincial committee hearing on reforms to our home and community care system just this past spring. The first is Gloria. She's a home care worker. And she goes on to say, as a home care worker, I am asked to provide an availability of 110 hours in a 2-week period. But I am only guaranteed 60 hours of work. If I should make myself unavailable at any time during this period, it voids my position, meaning that my employer will not honor the 60 hours if I fall short. I am a dedicated personal support worker, but I am afforded no paid sick leave. I am a committed personal support worker, but work without any hope of a good pension. She goes on to say that in my life, I care deeply at work, but I struggle greatly in my personal life. The second excerpt is from a home care worker named Jody. This is what she told our provincial parliamentarians. If any of you walked today in my shoes, you'd very quickly confront the fear of the unknown that I face each and every day. Behind each door are clients with mental health needs, clients with a history of violence. That information seldomly shared with the frontline workers, or spouses who themselves are aggressive. I have been backed into dark corners. I have heard the determined words, I am going to kill you, more than once. She goes on to say, I have seen the paralyzing look on the faces of clients' husbands who have blocked the doorways as I attempted to exit. On any given day, I can face these scenarios behind closed doors alone. Tragically, these two stories are not uncommon, and I believe many domestic workers would find a great deal in common with the words spoken by those two women working in home care. Dedication to the work, ultimatums about working hours, alone in the shadows, and at times in literal corners. However difficult it was, these two home care workers did get a platform to speak to decision makers at that committee hearing because they were members of a union. And however short, they did have the opportunity for a few minutes to look their elected officials in the eye, on the record, in Hansard, to tell them what their life was like and what their work was like, and why policymakers could do to make changes. That's the purpose of a union, to raise up the voices of working people. And that's the importance of organizing. So one voice becomes thousands. In the province of Ontario, a population roughly of about 14 million, it was a union that pushed a government to raise the minimum wage of tens of thousands of home care workers, increasing it by $4 an hour. To this day, we are still fighting to push forward for things like full-time work, workplace pensions, protecting workers from violence, and in a pandemic, fighting for life-saving basics like personal protective equipment. As I mentioned earlier, SEIU is the largest union in the home care sector in Ontario and the largest union in the home care sector in the United States. The thing about SEIU is it's made up of resilient workers, majority women, combating patriarchy, systemic racism, and class exploitation. So when you think of domestic workers, I want you to understand their power. When they are organized, because I want you to find the parallels to home care workers who have found organizing empowerment. What does that mean? It means organizing not just into unions, but into unlikely places where allies do their work. Take long-term care, for example. Perhaps for the first time, families, experts, and frontline workers are all coming together, organizing together to demand better conditions of work and care. A coalition like that seemed unimaginable only a few months ago. For me, this pandemic has revealed that when under the light, the public actually does recognize these systems are exploitive. It is not a coincidence that the exploitative system is the way it is. The outcomes, in fact, are a consequence of the exploitive system. It's clear that the conditions as they exist today are the result of policy choices. Policy choices that form the foundation of our elder care system, a current system of worker exploitation and elderly alienation. Vulnerable seniors sitting alone, workers at serious risk of injury. These are the extension of policy decisions by government and the for-profit nursing home industry, many of them in the home care sector. They're allowed to put our vulnerable seniors without care and the comfort that they need. Organizing means we can get the light on a sector whose CEOs are all run by men, every single one. Again, my point in leaving in the fight of the work of other skilled caregivers is simply because domestic caregivers and their allies can and should join together and find common cause against a male-dominated run system that keeps us all down. There should not be a PSW fight, or a janitorial fight, or a hotel workers fight, or a domestic workers fight. There should be a collective, united effort to organize all these fights into one sustained effort to support women in the care sector. That is why I'm so pleased to be here today with all of you, with the support of Ryerson to ignite a way of organizing a care system that lifts up the people who care for all of our families. Can women own the technology that runs an Uber-like app? Can women set the wages that provide dignity for their lives, as well as the lives of those they care for? Can women be heard, just like the sound of a military report dropping from the sky? I think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlene. It's inspiring the work that you are doing, organizing these workers here in Canada, and of course, highlighting the importance of unions so that our one voice becomes the voice of many thousands and become more powerful to break down these exploitive systems. So it's fitting now, as Charlene and Marie Clark and Myrtle were explaining in their presentations, for us to hear from a domestic worker and a leader from Brazil. Coruza Maria Oliveira is the president of FENITRAD. It's a national domestic workers federation in Brazil. So hopefully people have clicked on the interpretation button. Even if you just need the English, you need to click whether it's in English, as Coruza will be speaking to us in Portuguese. So Coruza became a domestic worker at the age of 10. Her first payment, though, it came about when she was 15 years old. And as thousands of Brazilian children, she increased the child labor statistics, as not many of them were able to do. And so she changed her life, and she's changing the lives of so many domestic workers as president of the National Federation of Domestic Workers. She is an iconic figure, a national role model in the fight for the rights of working class, racial justice, and the elimination of child domestic labor. Let's give a warm welcome for Coruza and hear her stories of resilience and success. Coruza. If participants can just bear with us for just another few moments, we are going to see if we can fix this technical glitch. I think she's unmuted herself now, and let's see if we can bring Caruza back. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Olá, tá me ouvindo? Tá me ouvindo agora? Ok. Então, obrigado e desculpe aí essa confusão da tecnologia, mas a gente é resistente, a gente luta até conseguir, e se consegue, porque nada para nós nunca foi fácil, não é isso? Então, eu quero agradecer mais uma vez por esse diálogo, agradecer a cada companheira, a Gene, a nossa companheira Mirtes, todas que estão nessa live, ou nesse webinário, tratando de situações muito pertinentes, que é a questão das trabalhadoras domésticas no mundo. E a situação do trabalho doméstico no mundo não é nada fácil. Eu sou aqui do Brasil e, como bem já foi falado, eu comecei a trabalhar aos 10 anos de idade, passei todo tipo de violência no local de trabalho, todo tipo de violência que vocês possam imaginar, sem falar na violência de estar fora da escola, né? E meus pais eu perdi muito cedo e tive que estar trabalhando, né? Muito cedo também, certo? E aqui no Brasil, a situação das domésticas não é diferente dos outros países, inclusive na América Latina, que a questão das trabalhadoras domésticas, a grande maioria são mulheres, mulheres indígenas, mulheres negras, mulheres imigrantes, que saem de seus países para buscar melhores condições de trabalho em outros países e, chegando lá, vive situações de violência, né? Domingo aqui nós vimos o caso de uma trabalhadora doméstica filipina, né? Que estava aqui no Brasil trabalhando para uma embaixadora filipinas, né? Na embaixada aqui, e onde essa trabalhadora doméstica sofria violência física, psicológica, né? Passou na TV, foi mostrado na TV, porque existia uma câmera que foi filmado, a pessoa que também trabalhava na embaixada filmou as situações de violência que essa trabalhadora sofria e foi denunciado, né? E a gente sabe que isso aí é um pequeno caso que chega até nós, né? Que a gente tem conhecimento. E os demais casos que não chegam ao conhecimento do público, né? Que são as violências dessas mulheres que são trazidas de outros países, mulheres que até no seu próprio país sofrem a violência, né? A violência da carga horária excessiva, a questão suas violações no seu direito, né? E aqui no Brasil nós temos mais de 80 anos de organização sindical. A primeira organização de doméstica foi criada em 1936. E de lá para cá nós tivemos conquistas importantes, tivemos direito à carteira assinada em 72, Então, são mais de 46 anos de direito à carteira assinada. Tivemos também o direito na Constituição Federal de salário, foi importante a organização das trabalhadoras domésticas aqui no Brasil, com apoio de outros e outras trabalhadoras, e, em especial, o movimento de mulheres feministas, mulheres negras, que contribuíram também para que as trabalhadoras domésticas brasileiras tivessem essas conquistas, né? Uma outra importante colocar a situação é que as trabalhadoras domésticas no Brasil são cerca de 8 milhões de trabalhadoras domésticas, né? A maior categoria na mão de obra feminina. Não como a gente diz, tem países que não têm 8 milhões de habitantes. E aqui no Brasil nós temos esse contingente de mulheres, que na sua maioria são mulheres pobres, mulheres negras, mulheres que começam o seu primeiro emprego no trabalho doméstico, né? E muitas permanecem nesse emprego o tempo todo. Chegam até aquelas que conseguem, resistem carteira e contribuir para a Previdência, conseguem se aposentar. No meu caso, eu já estou aposentada. Me aposentei por idade. Comecei a trabalhar muito cedo e demorei para me aposentar. Não foi fácil me aposentar. Mesmo começando tão cedo o trabalho, mas só com 60 anos foi que eu me aposentei. Há 3 anos atrás, eu me aposentei por idade, né? Então, aqui no Brasil, os sindicatos de doméstica, que são sindicatos que são liderados por mulheres, né? Porque essa questão também é muito importante falar, que são as mulheres que estão à frente, né? Elas estão, a grande maioria, no trabalho doméstico, e são elas as grandes lideranças das suas organizações por direito, por justiça. E os nossos sindicatos, nossas federações, nossas organizações de trabalhadoras domésticas, elas não lutam só por direitos trabalhistas, mas elas lutam por dignidade, contra a violência, né? A violência de gênero, de raça e de classe. Nós lutamos pelo direito da participação política nos espaços de poder. Nós temos levado essa discussão e temos enfrentado essas discussões junto com outras mulheres que estão aí no campo da luta por igualdade, por empoderamento, pela, emancipação das mulheres, né? Nós estamos aí nessa luta. Conseguimos avanços importantes no governo Lula e Dilma Rousseff, que foram os presidentes da República em 2003 a 2015. Tivemos importantes avanços. Em 2014, tivemos importante avanço na organização das domésticas. Então, nós conseguimos direitos como horas extra, adicional noturno, FGTS obrigatório. Conseguimos, inclusive, o direito das trabalhadoras domésticas mais jovens estarem em faculdade. Tem um número de trabalhadoras domésticas fazendo faculdade, que isso para nós é muito importante. No Brasil, houve também um decreto que proíbe o trabalho infanto-juvenil doméstico até os 18 anos, e isso para a sociedade capitalista, racista, preconceituosa, que acha que filho de pobre, filho de mulher negra, tem que estar trabalhando ainda na infância e não estar na escola, e sim trabalhando. Isso gerou uma polêmica de se dizer que era melhor que a criança estivesse trabalhando do que estivesse na rua ou roubando. E nós dissemos, nem uma coisa nem outra não é bom. Nem a criança está na rua, nem a criança está solta, mas a criança está na escola. Que seus pais tenham condições, que tenham políticas públicas para que essas mulheres possam estar cuidando dos seus filhos, possa estar colocando seus filhos nas escolas, na creche e escola a tempo integral, e não a criança estar trabalhando antes da idade. Que essas crianças que trabalham muito cedo, antes da idade já está trabalhando, essas crianças sofrem violência sexual, violência física, psicológica, a violência de estar com sobrepeso, pegando produtos químicos, lidando com animais ferozes, como cachorro de raça, Rottweiler, Pitbull, que muitas dessas crianças cuidam nessas casas desses animais arriscados a sofrer um acidente, né? Nessa questão da pandemia, a gente viu a realidade da sociedade brasileira quando obriga as trabalhadoras domésticas a sair em plena pandemia para ir para o local de trabalho. Mesmo quando o governo brasileiro, que não nos representa, né, é um governo que retira direitos da classe trabalhadora, que discrimina os jovens, que discrimina as mulheres, mas houve na luta no Congresso, houve um decreto de suspensão de contrato de trabalho, onde essas trabalhadoras o patrão fazia a suspensão de contrato sem prejuízo no salário e no emprego dela. Ela ficaria em casa e o governo era que pagaria o salário dela. Mas, infelizmente, os patrões obrigam as trabalhadoras a irem em plena pandemia, sair de casa para ir trabalhar, ameaçando, fazendo chantagens, dizendo que se ela não for trabalhar, ela vai perder o emprego, né? E muitas vezes essa trabalhadora, mesmo estando com o contrato suspenso, vai para o trabalho trabalhar, pegando ônibus, sem nenhuma segurança, onde os patrões não fornecem máscara, não fornecem luva, não fornecem o álcool gel para que essas trabalhadoras possam se proteger, né? E a gente soube que durante essa pandemia, muitas questões aconteceram no caso de violações dos direitos das trabalhadoras domésticas. Um deles é a questão da trabalhadora ficar confinada no local de trabalho. Então, patrões e patroas que obrigam a trabalhadora a ficar no local de trabalho durante 4 ou 5 meses sem vir em casa, que é para não estar se deslocando de casa para o trabalho e do trabalho para casa e não pegar ônibus, o coletivo, e não se contaminar e levar para o trabalho, né? Então, ela sofre com essa questão do trabalho, dela ficar confinada no local de trabalho 4, 5 meses, sem ir em casa para ver sua família. Infelizmente, tem acontecido isso aqui no Brasil. No Brasil também tem acontecido o caso de trabalhadoras que veio a óbito. O primeiro caso foi no Rio de Janeiro, que uma trabalhadora doméstica, no início da pandemia, foi contaminada porque os patrões chegaram do exterior e obrigando ela a ir a trabalhar em plena pandemia. E ela acabou sendo contaminada. O patrão e a patroa que estavam contaminadas, eles podem pagar plano médico particular. E a trabalhadora doméstica, que depende do sistema público de saúde, que não é de qualidade. Então, além dela ser de grupo de risco, mais de 60 anos, diabética, e aí foi quando ela veio a óbito. O outro caso também é o caso dessa trabalhadora que era para ficar de quarentena em casa, não vir trabalhar, e a escola do filho estava fechada, né? A creche não está funcionando aqui no Brasil, nem a escola, e eu creio que em várias partes do mundo, e no Brasil está acontecendo isso. Então, a trabalhadora teve que ir para o trabalho, foi forçada a ir para o trabalho e levar seu filho, né? Que essa criança acabou sendo praticamente assassinada quando a trabalhadora doméstica saiu para passear com o cachorro da patroa e deixou a criança, o Miguel, de 5 anos, ficou lá com a patroa no apartamento, e ela saiu para passear com o cachorro da patroa, né? Quando ela saiu para passear com o cachorro da patroa, o Miguel começou a chorar que queria ver a mãe, que queria ver a mãe. A patroa não teve paciência de segurar o menino até a trabalhadora voltar, né? E aí o que é que aconteceu? A patroa soltou o menino no elevador. Soltou o menino no elevador e o que aconteceu foi que o menino subiu para o 9º andar e onde veio a subir em uma janela e cair e veio a óbito. É uma questão que está sendo muito debatida aqui no Brasil. A patroa foi presa, mas pagou fiança, foi solta, porque uma criança de 5 anos não era para estar solta dentro de um elevador, né? A patroa tinha que segurar a criança. Se ela não tinha paciência de segurar a criança, ela descia com a criança e entregava para a mãe, e não soltar a criança no elevador. Infelizmente, está acontecendo isso. Aqui, a semana passada, houve uma violência também de uma menina de 4 anos, em Pernambuco, onde a trabalhadora foi trabalhar, forçada a ir trabalhar, levou a menina de 4 anos, a filhinha de 4 anos para o trabalho, e o patrão de 60 anos estava abusando sexualmente da menina. Um momento que ela teve que sair para comprar alguma coisa e a menina ficou no apartamento e esse senhor estava abusando sexualmente desta criança. Então, é outro caso também que está na justiça. Então, são situações que, em pleno século XXI, as mulheres trabalhadoras domésticas ainda passa por situações de diversas violências, não só com ela, mas com sua família, né? Porque a violência de você não poder acompanhar um filho quando adoece, não poder ir no médico, não poder ir na reunião da escola do seu filho, você não poder estar dando atenção, né, às suas crianças, tem uma carga horária que dê para você trabalhar e voltar para dar atenção aos seus filhos, é muito ruim isso. Então, enquanto você está cuidando dos filhos da patroa, os seus não tem quem cuide. Então, essa é uma situação que o sindicato aqui no Brasil luta por creche e por escola a tempo integral, lutamos pela questão da carga horária. Tem uma situação, companheiras e amigas, que é a questão da convenção. Nós conseguimos a PEC 72, depois a gente conseguiu a Lei 150, é um avanço, é muito importante, mas a gente também, a nossa Convenção 189, foi ratificada no Brasil, foi ratificada, mas com esse governo que está aí, que retira direito da classe trabalhadora, nós estamos preocupadas deles quererem implementar a Convenção 189 e nessa implementação ser retirada de direito nosso. Então, nós não estamos aqui no Brasil fazendo pressão para a Convenção 189 ser implementada, porque esse governo que está aí retira direito da classe trabalhadora, como fez com a reforma trabalhista e com a reforma previdenciária. Então, nós estamos aguardando o futuro que será para que a gente continue lutando, certo? Então, companheiras, eu não sei se meu tempo já passou, se eu ainda tenho mais tempo. Oi, ok, já está concluído, conclui. Então, para mim, foi muito legal participar aqui desse painel, dizer que a luta das trabalhadoras domésticas é mundial, ela é internacional, e a gente precisa se fortalecer com a FIT, com a Conlatral, com as organizações de defesa dos direitos humanos dos trabalhadores e trabalhadoras. Um grande abraço e muito obrigado.
Thank you so much, Caruza. I know that there's so much to share, and the stories of what's happening with domestic workers in Brazil is absolutely horrible, tragic, of course. And through your message, we are exposing what's happening in Brazil, plight of domestic workers, and we will continue to work with you in solidarity. And it is absolutely an international situation that we should all take part in. So thank you so much again. Our last and final panelist, before we go to a brief question and answer, is Elizabeth Tang, the General Secretary of International Domestic Workers Federation. Prior to this, Elizabeth was the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions, where she worked for 16 years. She also holds a postgraduate degree in sociology of labor from the University of Warwick in the UK. And really, through her leadership and hurdles, when they started IDWF, they had 14 affiliates. Today, through that leadership, they have 78 affiliates in 61 countries. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your leadership, and let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jenny, for your kind words. Thank you to the Ryerson University KK for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to talk about domestic workers and the IDWF. I'm glad you have already heard from our great leaders, Myrtle and Carissa. And indeed, the success of the IDWF really depends on them. A group of women who are like Carissa and Myrtle. They are strong, they are committed, they are bold, and they are effective, good in organizing and mobilizing and organizing for power, for change. And that is the main pillar, the energy that drives the organization to keep on moving forward. And we have forever expansion of membership. And for this reason, I'm hopeful. And I share with what Charlene have just said. Now the next is we must organize one fight. And with that, we are sure to win. And the pandemic, the COVID-19 had hit domestic workers hard. I don't have to repeat the stories of which Carissa has shared. But during these difficult times, the silver lining is many of our affiliates are still trying to organize and trying to get their voice heard. And therefore, during these difficult times, you'll be surprised to hear that some of our affiliates, have still increased their membership, all the way from Indonesia to Peru, to Mexico, to small country like Togo. And also, you'll be surprised to hear, due to the effort of domestic workers during these difficult times, keep on pushing and pushing, we still find some improvements over domestic workers' rights in some countries, like the adoption of a new domestic workers law in Peru, and also the openness of the government in South Africa to include domestic workers in the health and safety law. So things are still improving, and because no matter how hard the situation is, but whenever there is space, there's opportunity, our leaders, our members, never let it go. They always grab it and move their organization and move themselves towards the goal. Because of this pandemic and also the difficult situation our members are in last May, for the first time since we were founded, we set up a solidarity fund because so many of our members have suffered job losses, income losses. And mind you, when they do not have job, when they do not have income, they have nothing because domestic workers from the beginning do not have any protection, any social protection. So if they do not have the job, they do not have anything for themselves and also for the families. So in May, we finally took the decision to set up a solidarity fund to enable our affiliates to do some of the rapid responses to help the members who are really in deep need, in destitute. And we have released about $1 million US. But because we are spreading it over some 55 affiliates, so each organization actually gets about $5,000 to $10,000 on average. But with this, they have tried to do as much as they can. They provide PPE to those domestic workers so that they can go back to work. They keep their office running. They pay their organizers transportation fees so that they can visit their members, and they keep their internet, their Wi-Fi on so that they can communicate with their members even though they are far away, and their actions that is most important. And at the same time, we keep on monitoring the situation on the ground so that we know the needs of our members, and we do all we can to be relevant. So at this moment, our affiliates in Latin America have just completed a survey on the impacts of the pandemic and the related policy on their livelihood. And in other regions, Africa, in the Middle East, the survey is still ongoing. Through this data collection exercise, we keep engaging our members, and also we will be able to produce reports that will help us in the future to do advocacy and to improve our programs. And so this pandemic is still there with us, and our members are still in crisis. No one knows when this will end, maybe next year, maybe longer, but we are fighting on. And we keep the Solidarity Fund there so that we will be always ready to provide support to our members. Even it's little, but it is important to keep the organization going so that we'll be ready to come back stronger. And I appeal to you, do as much as you can to fight with us and also to support us. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The work that you're doing, that International Domestic Workers Federation is doing currently, is really a life and death reach to the domestic workers. And of course, you do much more than that, but we want to thank you for the incredible work that has been taking place. We have a few extra minutes. We may go beyond 11:30 just by a few minutes if people have the time so that we can answer the questions. But I want to show you a very short 1-minute video from the International Domestic Workers Federation on the life-changing solidarity work that they've been providing domestic workers around the world through this Solidarity Fund that Elizabeth has mentioned. We are going to put a link in the Q&A room as well as the chat room for anyone who is able to donate immediately. We talked about walking and supporting, and this is an international event. So we're gonna have you take actions. So we're gonna queue up the video. And if you are able to donate any amount, please go in there and donate right now. Thank you.
Because of you, your donations, we are able to support more than 200 family, and also pay rents. And we have no word again to thank you so much.
En nombre de todas las trabajadoras del hogar, queremos agradecer a la Federación Internacional de las Trabajadoras del Hogar por esta ayuda humanitaria.
The Domestic Workers Federation has been providing for all of this. We are in this crisis together. Please care for those who care for you. Donate to our fund today. Thank you.
We will continue to fundraise so that our Solidarity Fund will grow enough to meet our needs.
So thank you again, all of our panelists. Of course, I'm going to say a very quick thank you for all the support all around here. But we have a question, and I'm going to turn it to Myrtle, who would like to answer the question. Do you think the government's response to improve conditions for home care, long-term care, domestic workers in response to the inequalities exposed by COVID-19 has been sufficient? So we'll turn it to Myrtle and then to any other panelists who'd like to respond. Myrtle?
I think, in South Africa, we've been very disappointed by our government because of the fact of technology. Domestic workers have no means to get into the solidarity 19, and many domestic workers was isolated and did not get any funding. So we are very disappointed, and we just heard now today that a big organization in South Africa is taking our government to court starting tomorrow to make sure that the next 3 months of COVID-19 funding will improve the life of domestic workers. So this is currently the condition in South Africa.
Thank you. If there's any other panelists that'd like to respond, please turn on your mic and your video. Charlene?
Oops. There we go. Hi. Yeah, so the question is, has the government done enough? My very strong, stern answer is no. Here in the province, where a lot of the changes would have to happen from a provincial level, the government has quite frankly wasted the summer where we've had an opportunity to prepare for the second wave. They were reckless, they were disorganized during the first wave, and bills have come before our legislature here in Ontario, one of them being to stop private care, the other is coming today to increase levels of care. And each of them have been pushed back. We're hopeful today that it gets passed, but no accountability has been held. And in fact, 30% of our workers in long-term care and home care are not returning to work. They've left and not coming back. So yes, they have not done enough.
Marie?
Thanks, Jenny. I just want to agree wholeheartedly with Charlene. There has not been enough done. We can say that some of the things that governments have put in place may have helped. However, there is no public inquiry. People are still not able to work their full to be able to make a good living. We need to increase pay. We need to increase safety, personal protection, to ensure that people don't have to go from home to home to home, or from private care residents to private care residents. They should be able to have a job that pays them a decent wage and gives them proper benefits with one job, rather than having to go 2 or 3 or 4 places.
Thank you. I mean, we're constantly struggling, fighting to ensure that there's better jobs, more security, but of course the full-time jobs, so that the dangers are lessened for our domestic workers instead of going from home to home, workplace to workplace. So excellent points. I have another question. Aside from extending solidarity to domestic workers globally, what can our labor movement do here in Canada to organize the thousands of migrant domestic workers who work in private homes across Canada? So that's a domestic question. I'm going to pose it to Marie first and then Charlene second. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. First of all, we have been calling for a pathway to citizenship for migrant workers. That's the first step, because a lot of the domestic workers coming in are coming in as migrant workers. They're coming in as temporary foreign workers, and they all need a path to citizenship. So that's the first thing. Second, I think that what the labor movement can do to assist is to organize, ensure that, and we have to recognize we can't organize domestic workers in the same way that we organize others. We need to do it the way in which the International Domestic Workers Federation did it, talking to one person at a time, having small group meetings, finding out what the needs are for particular domestic workers in particular parts of the country, and make sure that we come together, not just as a labor movement, but also together with community to be there to provide the supports and all the directives that are needed to assist domestic workers to come together. And again, you know, we keep saying an injury to one is an injury to all when we talk about the labor movement. The rest of the labor movement needs to stand up for domestic workers. They are workers and they do deserve the respect and dignity like any other worker. And they are the ones that are prone to mental health issues, as I answered in the other question, because they're stuck in somebody else's home for the most part, you know, and have to deal with that violence, that harassment, and whatever that family that they're dealing with have to dish out with very little support. So we need to be there. We need to ensure we know where everyone is, and we are there to support them no matter where they are.
Yeah, I agree with Marie. Basically, the simple answer is that it's time to care for those who care for us. And that means providing regulations, providing laws that allow and absolutely demand that workers are safe. It allows them to organize. It treats them with the dignity that they so deserve. I said in my comments, policy workers have the authority and the ability to make policies and laws. They need to do that. Again, the registry, maybe identifying where these workers are, knowing and having the ability to oversee the conditions of work that they are in. So tracking and knowing. And again, I just say it takes political will and courage, somebody to stand up and get it done.
Thank you so much. That's the end of our questions. Was there any final comments any of the panelists want to raise or share? We've got about 4 minutes. I'm trying to put the correct donation link onto the Q&A chat room. I put a little typo, so I'm going to try to do that very quickly in the meantime. But any final comments from our panelists or any further questions from any of our participants? Okay, so I want to take the time to thank again Kike Roach, Ryerson University, of course, all of those that are supporting our team here, our translators, Sylvania, Bettina, Esperanza, of course we have Salman and Luke from Ryerson, our ASL interpreters, Marcia and Christopher, would not happen here. Daphne, who's joined us from the International Domestic Workers Federation. And last but not least, all of our phenomenal, strong women leaders in the labor movement, Myrtle, Marie Clark, Charlene, Elizabeth, and Caruza. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to all the people who have taken the time to join us, to show your solidarity, and then to spread the word. And if you check the Q&A chat room, we have now just put the correct link to donate to the Solidarity Fund, to the International Domestic Workers Union. If you can cut and paste that Keep it handy, put it on your Facebook, share it with friends to ensure that domestic workers have the support that they need. And this is a small token and a way for us to show our international solidarity to domestic workers around the world. And then, of course, we've got work to do to push Canada to ratify 189, to push our governments here in the province of Ontario, where I'm at, to ensure that our healthcare workers, our personal support care workers are not only protected, but they have decent, full-time, good-paying jobs. And this is a common problem worldwide. So once again, thank you so much. Solidarity to all of you.